Now that we have those two classes in place, the last step to getting the core data structure set up is creating our managed objects. Creating our managed objects is actually easier than you might think, because in fact we did most of the work already when we created our model file. Now, all we need to do in order to generate our managed object files is click on our data model, click Editor, and then click Create NS Managed Object Subclass. From here, we select the model file we'd like to create entity classes from, and then the entities or objects we would like to be managed. Here we'll select both Note and Notebook because we want to manage both of them. And we'll click Next, and then Create. Cool, and here they are. Ta-da! But wait a minute, how come there are 4 files here? So when you generate these managed classes, 2 files are actually created for each entity. You have a class file, and you have an extension. The extension file contains code that matches up with our object model. You never ever want to write anything into these extensions because Xcode will overwrite them and recreate the class if you modify the model. So it's good to write any code inside of the managed object class itself. Now let's just move these down to the model folder where they belong, and feel free to pause the video here and go ahead and generate these managed object classes on your own. Great, so this Note class is looking pretty bare. What we need to do now is add an init method so that this class can create usable instances of itself. We'll add in a convenience init, which takes text, a string with the words new note in it, and an NS managed object context called context. Then what we need to do is create an NS entity description. An entity description is an object that has access to all the information we provided in the entity part of the model, and it's needed in order to instantiate any managed object class. From the entity description, we call entity for name, which takes in the name of the entity, so in this case, note, and the context in which we want the note to live, in managed object context, context. Then we can call the designated initializer, which is the initializer for NS managed object, the superclass, which takes in the entity description and the context in order to create a new instance. And you can see the parameter name says insert into managed object context, which is where the instance will live. Remember that every single core data object needs to know its context. Lastly, we just initialize some properties. Text will equal text, which we can remember is the new note, and creation date will get initialized to NSDate object, which is just the current date. We'll put in this fatal error in case no entity exists and the entity name we're passing in, and we're done. I'm also just going to add in this variable, which is just a formatted version of that creation date property we initialized up there. It just makes the date more human readable. And that's it. We can now just do the same thing for the Notebook class. Awesome! Why don't you give it a try? Before moving ahead to the next video, make sure you have both inits and get no warnings.